Okay, now we're continuing with a new kind of loop called the do-while loop. So let's see how we can use this one. So in the last two loops, in the for loop and the for each loop, there were a fixed number of times that the loop would repeat, right? In the for loop, we said for some I equals 1 to 10, or from I equals 1 to 5, for int count equals 1 to 5. So this loop is only going to repeat 5 times. It is going to repeat 5 times, and it's going to repeat exactly 5 times, and we know how many times it's going to repeat. And in the next type that we studied, the for each loop, like this one, where we were we're going to add an item to our list box for every directory in our under the C, right? For every directory in here, we were going to write something into the list box. So actually we know how many times that's going to loop as well, because we can check how many directories there are in here. So that's also going to loop for a fixed number of times. However, sometimes we want to be able to loop and we don't know how many times we're going to have to do it. For example, suppose you want to interact with the user and let the user keep entering new information until they feel like they're finished. So you don't know when they feel like they're going to finish, but you might provide them with like a keyword or like a word like done, and when they type in the word done, that means they're finished, but you don't know when they're going to do that. So you can't use a for loop or a for each loop, because a for loop or for each loop requires basically that you know how many times you're going to perform the loop, but in this case you don't. So in that case, we can use something another type of loop called a do loop. And the first type of loop, do loop, we're going to explore is the do until loop. Like do until the user types in the word done. So the author here says, the other kind of loop you can use is one that keeps happening until a certain condition is met. This is known as a do loop, and there are a number of variations. So the first variation we're going to look at is the do until loop. Okay, so in this example we're going to build a do until loop, and it's going to generate a bunch of random numbers going to appear in here, and it's going to keep generating random numbers. So we're going to loop through generating more and more and more random numbers, but we want to have some place where it's going to stop, and we're going to we want to employ the do until loop. So we want it to continue until some condition is met. So it's going to keep generating random numbers until some condition is met, and that condition is that we get a random number equal to 10. So let's try it. So there, it generates a bunch of random numbers, and finally when it gets to 10, it stops. So we're doing until we get the number 10. If we try it again, looks like that. If I try it again, looks like that. If I try it again, looks like that. If I try it again, it looks like that. Okay, so we want to build such a loop now. We want to build a form that includes this kind of loop. Okay, so follow these instructions here and these instructions here to build your random number generator that will loop until a certain condition is met. That is, it will loop until the condition that the random number random numbers that you're generating, that we get a 10. Okay, so build that, and then we'll discuss how it works. Okay, now I'll discuss how it works. So first of all, we're declaring a new kind of data type called a random. Okay, so usually we do something like dim. We have something, a name here, as string or as integer, and so on. But Visual Basic also provides us with other kinds of data types, and there's one data type that's called a random. But you have to use this keyword new with random. So whenever you want to declare a new random type, you have to have new and random. Okay, so we'll do that. So this is kind of a declaring a variable, but it's a different type than we've dealt with before. It's random. Now, fortunately, Visual Basic provides us with this type of object, or this data type called random, and you'll see it's very convenient. Okay, then we do a standard declaration here, int random number as integer, and we also remember we're allowed to assign it a value at the same time. We assign it the value 0 here. Okay, then next thing is we use our sub procedure that we built called clear list to clear the list. So we use that here. And now we get next into the loop. So you can see we have do until, and we have loop down here. So that's the outline of the loop. And then here's the code that gets repeatedly run. And we also have a stop condition. Here we do something until this happens, until this variable that we declared up here equals 10. Okay, so the first thing we do is we use this thing, a kind of variable, to generate a random number. And when you create something of the type new random, you have the ability to generate random numbers with that. And the way that you do it, now let me just mention one thing. We have been talking, I've used the word controls many times. We talk about a button as being a control and a list box as being a control, but I've also used the word object for all of these things. And I've also said these are instances of objects, which is a little bit more correct. But I'll just say object for now. So I've been using that word object. And objects are very important in programming. And this thing is also an object. Okay? And remember that objects, just like controls, remember controls have properties. Like this has a text property, it has a name property, and so on. It has color property, and so on. And they also have methods. Remember, we looked at different methods associated with different objects. Remember that we said if you look at a button, that it has a lot of different methods associated with it. Okay, so these are all different methods associated with this particular object. So objects, including controls, these are controls, but they're also objects, have methods associated with them, as well as they have properties, right? We know that, when I click on this, we have all these properties. So objects have methods and properties, or I guess I could say objects have properties and methods. So this is actually an object. Even strings are actually objects, and we've used that fact before. Or in fact, integers are actually objects, and integers have methods. And for example, down here, we've done this before. This is an integer, right? This is an integer, and it has a method. It's called the toString method. Okay, so even integers have methods. So anyway, this also will have methods, and one of the methods it has is the next method. So what this does is this will generate the next in a sequence of random variables. So in other words, in order to generate a random variable, what we do is, in order to generate a random number, sorry if I said random variable, in order to generate a random number, you create such an object like this, you do something like this as new random, and then you can generate a sequence of random numbers by taking the object that you've created and using the next method, and this just means generate a random number between I think between 0 and 25, maybe between 0 and 24 actually. Okay, so this will generate a random number between 0 and 24. So this is part of what's in our loop. So the first thing we're going to do is generate a random number between 0 and 24. And then what are we going to do with that? It goes into here, and then what are we going to do with that? We're going to add it to our list. And we're going to use its string method to convert it to a string first. And then we'll add it to the list. Okay, and then what happens? After we've done that, what happens? Just like in other loops, we're going to go up and repeat the loop again. But first, we'll come to here, and we'll check to see whether this random number that we've generated is equal to 10. If it's not equal to 10, then we'll do the loop again. And we'll get a new random number, and then we'll add that to the list, and then we'll come up here and check whether that random number is equal to 10. And if it's not equal to 10, we'll do it again. And we'll keep doing it until it's equal to 10. So that's how this do until loop works. Now let's read through how he describes it. He says a do until loop keeps running the loop until the given condition is met, until this condition is met. When you use this type of loop, there isn't a control variable. Notice that there's no control variable here, or not exactly a control variable. Okay? Rather, you have to keep track of the current position of the loop yourself. So if you wanted to know how many times this has run, you could have a variable which increments every time it goes through a loop, and then you'd know how many times it had run. But anyway, they don't do that. You begin by declaring a variable, also known as an object, here. You begin by declaring a variable also known as an object for the random class, okay, which provides methods for generating random numbers. So fortunately we have such a class which we can use to generate random numbers. This object has been prefixed with obj to specify that this is an object derived from a class. So we haven't really talked much about classes, so this may not be that clear, but you can just use it like this. The next variable that you declare is the int random number, which is used to receive the random number generated by your object random object. That's over here. We generate something over here, and we place it in here. We assign it here. Then you clear the list of any previous items that may have been added. So we clear the list. Next, you set up the loop, indicating that you want to keep running the loop until this is equal to 10. So do until this is equal to 10. With each iteration of the loop, you ask the random number generator for a new random number, right? So you ask the random number generator for a new random number, and store it in int random number. This is done by calling the next method of the object random, right? We called the next method to get a random number here. We called the next method of it. In this case, you passed 25 as a parameter. That means this. We put in 25 as a parameter to this method, meaning that any number returned should be between 0 and 24 inclusive. The number that you supply must be one larger than the biggest number you ever want to get. So in other words, if you want to go up to 24, you have to put in 25 here. In other words, the bounds that you ask for are non-inclusive. So that just means if you want up to 24, you have to put a bounds of 25. So it doesn't include 25. Then you add the number, that number to the list. So you do this here. The magic happens when you get to the loop statement. At this point, Visual Basic 2010 returns not to the first line within the loop, not to here, but instead to the do until line. So it goes back up to the do until line. When execution returns to do until, the expression is evaluated. So this expression here is evaluated, and we check to see whether it's true. If it's not true, we run the loop again. If it is true, we leave the loop. We exit the loop. We drop out of the loop. Provided the expression returns false, the execution pointer, that means where we are, moves to the first line within the loop. However, if int random number is 10, the expression returns true, and instead of moving to the first line within the loop, you continue at the first line immediately after this word. So we're going to go outside the loop, in other words. In effect, the loop is stopped. Okay, so what was that called? Was that called the do while loop? No. That was called the do until loop. Okay, so we just played with the do until loop. Okay, however, there's another type of do loop called the do while loop. So let's look at that next.